All right. So during week one, day one, we went through and install fest, and everyone should have a Postgres database or Postgres installed on their local machine. And in order to see whether or not we have Postgres or have a database in our terminal, we can literally just type PSQL. And if you do that, it should jump right into your machine's users database. In order to get out of that, you can just quit and clear. So if you just type PSQL, PSQL, you can jump right into a database named TA-preet. But we can also create a database by writing a command. Does anybody know the command to create a database? So writing just PSQL is like the default. But if I don't want to use my TA-preet database, because you can have multiple databases on your local machine. Does anybody know the command to create a database?
I want to say it's something simple like create, but I'd have to look it up.
Nope, you are exactly right. So if I wanted to create a database called Code Platoon, all I have to do is create DB, standing for database, space, and then like Code Platoon. So I'm going to create a database called Code Platoon. All right. So I create a database. I didn't get any errors or anything. That's good when you don't get any errors. Now, in order to go into my Code Platoon database, I can do PSQL and then followed by the name of my database. So code-platoon. And now we have, it says you're in the PSQL server, and I'm inside of my Code Platoon database right now. Just like I was in my TA-preet, because TA-preet's the name of my Mac. Now I'm actually in the Code Platoon database. And I can check to see whether or not I have any tables in my database by doing \D. And it said did not find any relations. And that's what I should expect, because I just created a database. I didn't add any tables to it. I haven't done my database schema or anything like that. To get out of that, I just do \Q, and it brings me back to that. So now let's actually go ahead and actually create some SQL files and design a database schema for Code Platoon. So if I list everything out, I'm in my SQL practice directory. So I'm going to create a file called schema.sql. So I'm creating a SQL file. That's not a Python file or a JavaScript file or a Ruby file or anything. It is a SQL file. And I just did that. And now you can see I've got the SQL file in the Explorer, and you can see that it is like represents a database by the four disks that kind of represent like a server or a database. So I'm going to bring that over here. So I just created a schema SQL file. Let's clear the terminal. And let's go ahead and actually create a couple of tables. So say I wanted to create Code Platoon is expanding. We have a lot of graduates, and we want to create a application for our Code Platoon alumni to stay connected, and just to keep just like it's almost like LinkedIn for Code Platoon graduates, maybe mentors and something like that. So if I needed to create, I'm going to create a couple of tables. I'm going to create a students table, and I'm also going to create a cohorts table. So a student belongs to a cohort. So because like if I need to figure out, I want to keep track of like who belongs to which cohort when they graduated, etc. So does anybody remember the query the SQL query to create a table.
Create table.
Create table.
Yep. So all capital letters. I think it works without all capital letters, but I'm used to doing all caps. That's what I learned, but I think it still works without capital letters. So create table. And I'm going to create a students table. So best practice, all lowercase, plural, because it holds a bunch of students. Parentheses. Don't forget that little semicolon. And then I press enter and it's already kind of indented for me. So now I need to add some columns. So I'm going to add an ID. I'm going to add a first name and a last name initially. And I'm going to have to need to give each field a type as well. And I'm new. I don't know what to do. So I'm going to say how to create table SQL Postgres QL. I should do example as well. Okay, postgrestutorial.com is actually a pretty good resource. So I'm just going to go to that and kind of look at it. So create table if not exists. I don't know what that means. So data type. Okay. So it looks like it's create table. That's good. We can add some constraints to this. Not null, unique, primary key, foreign key. I don't know what any of that means. Check. I don't know what that means. So I've got an example down here. So accounts, user ID. I'm going to associate that with my ID up here. So I'm going to say, what is it? Serial primary key. Does anybody know what serial means when I add this? So serial means anytime I add a new record to the database, it's going to automatically increment the ID by 1. So the very first student I added there, it's going to start at 1. So ID of 1, the next record that goes in there, it's going to be an ID of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. So it's going to go all the way up. It's serialized. Go from starts at 1, 2, 3, 4, it keeps going. So there's going to be no duplicate IDs of students in the students table. Does anybody know what primary key is?
That keeps it keeps it unique. So you need a unique something unique in each table so you can link it to other tables.
Yep. So the primary key ensures that when I relate the students to other tables, it's going to reference this specific column or such as the ID. So the primary key, it's going to make sure, hey, this column is the primary key. So this is the table or the column that's going to be associated or relate other tables to the students table. So if we have another table, it's going to be student underscore ID. If we need the students in there. After each column, so each one of these represents a column, I need a comma and our first name. All right. So it looks like varchar. So here's an example. So I'm just going to say like Postgres QL varchar example. So again, varchar variable length. So I can do varchar 10. All right. So I'm going to do varchar. And then I can do max length of 255. And same thing with last name. All right. So let's go ahead and actually run this. So I created my first table schema for my Code Platoon database. Now I need to actually load this schema and load it into my Code Platoon database. I can do that by doing PSQL, the name of my database, Code Platoon, and then an arrow pointing into my Code Platoon database, the name of this file. So schema SQL saying, hey, load the schema, run the schema SQL file on the Code Platoon database. And now I get an error. It says syntax error at or near the closing parentheses. So like right here. This is one of the reasons why debugging SQL isn't great, because it doesn't tell you, it's not that descriptive as to like what the error actually is. It says line 5 right here. So SQL is very bad at telling you at like error handling. Doesn't kind of like, this is where we think the error is at, but it's not really that helpful most of the time. Does anybody know what the error can possibly be?
It wants another line or you to get rid of that comma on line 4.
Yep. So here, just like it's like an object, it doesn't like this last comma there. So now if I run that, so again, schema pointing into the Code Platoon database. So PSQL, the name of the database, angle bracket pointing into the Code Platoon database, schema SQL. It's going to run that. Now it's going to say create table. So that's good. That means the table was created. Now, how can I tell that this table was actually created? So I can actually go into the Code Platoon database by doing PSQL Code Platoon. So I'm going to go enter into the Code Platoon database like so. I'm going to go \D, and now it says list of relations. It's got the students table right here, and the owner is this, my Mac user TA Preet. So I've got this students table. Don't worry about this student ID sequence. That just means, I believe it means that the table is sequenced by the student ID. So it goes up by 1. So there we go. And now I can actually inspect. So I know I've got the students table, but like maybe I don't know what columns are in that students table. I can do \D, the name of the table, to inspect the actual table now. So here, table, public students, column, I've got the ID, first name, last name, the data type. So the ID is integer, the varying character field of 255, etc. And you can see nullable, not null, means the ID cannot be null, means there always has to be a value in there. But I can leave the first name and last name blank if I want to. But if I didn't want to do that, so I'm like, crap, I actually want every student to have a first name and last name. So I'm new, how to make Postgres table or field, I would say column, not null. Example. So I don't know what this is, but let's see. Alter table set not null. So maybe it's not null. I can actually look at the Postgres documentation. I don't know what version we are, but there's a bunch of different versions. That's like the lowest version. Create not null constraint Postgres. Example. So Postgres tutorial, pretty good. So email address is null. column name, data type, not null. So I'm just gonna add that to that field. So clear. So I made a change to my table. Now I need to reload this table into my Postgres database. So I can do PSQL code platoon, push in this schema. And it says, uh-oh, error, relation students already exists. What does that mean? Does anybody know?
Your table is already there and you're trying to create a table that already exists.
Yep. So I'm like, let's see if we can do something like that. So relation table already exists. Got Stack Overflow from 2012, so 10 years ago. I don't know. Is that saving what they're asking? Create a table that was dropped previously. It's probably not what I'm looking for. Relation table already exists. If you want to drop tables, you have to do it in the right order. So I don't know. Drop table, if exists, never seen that before. Google that. Let's do Postgres. There we go. So drop table, if exists, the name of the table. All right, so if I want to drop that table and start kind of over, students. See if that works. So if I run that, so I dropped the table and then I created the table. Now I can PSQL in the code platoon and then /d or /d students. There we go. We've got not null for the first name and last name. Cool. So we've created one table. Let's actually create a cohorts table now. So create table cohorts, because I need to create some cohorts. I'm going to also want to add an ID. So I'm just going to copy this down. And I'm going to do cohort name. It's also going to be a varchar. I'm going to make this 100 lines. And this is also going to be a not null. And I think I've got cohorts spelled wrong. All right. So I'm going to quit that. Run that again. So drop table, create table. So now if I go into my database and doing /d, I can see I've got my cohorts table and my students table. If I want to inspect my cohorts table, I can do /d cohorts, and you can see I've got an ID and cohort name. And both are not null. Great. So if I get out of my code platoon database, SQL, I can do /q and it brings me back to the terminal. All right, now if I happen to make a change or something, I can do that. And again, I get that error relations cohorts already exists. So I'm going to have to also do drop table if exists for cohorts. And I can drop the table because I don't have any data in there, so I can just drop everything if I want to, because I'm not losing any data. All right. So let's go ahead and add some data to it. So let's add some data. So I'm going to do touch seed. So seed, it's a seed data. So I'm going to create another file called seed SQL. I'm going to split this terminal or split the screen. So I've got my schema over here, and I'm going to insert some data into cohorts and students. All right. So let's insert some cohorts. So insert into the name of the table, cohorts, followed by the cohort name. I don't need to add the ID in there because the ID is automatically created for me because I'm using this ID serial primary key. I'm going to do values. So what values I'm going to insert into this cohort name. And I'll do part-time Charlie. Like so. I'll create a couple more cohorts. Papa, Platoon, Platoon, and do Mike Platoon. All right. So I created some queries to insert data into my cohorts table. So insert it into the cohorts table, the cohort name, I'm going to insert the value of part-time Charlie Platoon. So just like I seeded or created the schema, loaded that in there, I can also do that with the seed data. Let's go ahead and add some students as well. So insert into students. We'll do the first name, comma, last name, values, Adam. So first name and Donald. I'm just gonna bring this over here so it doesn't go over to one line. First name, last name. Got David. And one more. We got Emma. Oh. Emma De Silva. All right. So let's go ahead and can anybody see like an issue with this data? Or these tables? With regards to how I'm architecting it?
There's no relation between the two?
Yep, there's no relation between the two yet. So before I add this data, because I'm going to be like, wait, Adam belongs to Mike Platoon, David belongs to part-time Charlie, Emma belongs to Mike Platoon. So I'm going to also have to add another field here. So there's a couple ways I can do that. I can alter the database. So I can do touch alter.sql, code alter.sql. And in order to alter the database table, I can say alter table, the students table. I'm going to add a column. So add column. I'm going to add the column cohort underscore ID. I'm going to make that an integer. And I'm also going to make sure that this cohort ID references this cohorts, but I'm new. How to relate to tables Postgres. All right, so I can do an inner join, but that doesn't make any join tables. Creating multiple tables and table relation, launch school. All right, so I've got add column. All right, so here's just primary key. One-to-one. I'm just looking at this code. So it looks like references, PostgreSQL. Let's see, constraints. Just gonna search for references. Here we go. So order tables, we got a product number. So I've got foreign keys. So this product number column is an integer and it references the products table product number ID. So if I look over here, I could say integer references the cohorts table. And I don't need to say the actual column like ID because it defaults to the primary key or it defaults to that. So I can do PSQL code platoon and enter in that alter. So I altered the table. I can see that actually see if it took place by looking at my students table by going into PSQL code platoon and \D students. And now you can see I've got that cohort ID right there. And right here, it says foreign key constraints. The cohort ID is a foreign key and it references the cohort's ID. So if I didn't want to alter the table in place and just reload this entire code, I can quit, clear the terminal, and just add this constraint here like so. And that will also do it as well. So if I were to PSQL code platoon, and then just enter in the schema, because I don't have any data saved into it yet. Oh, cohorts does not exist. So this is another thing you got to keep at least, yeah, got to keep in mind is that it reads up to bottom or top to bottom. So it comes in here, drops the table cohorts. So this cohorts table no longer exists. Comes down to here, cohort ID integer references a cohorts table, but that cohorts table doesn't exist anymore because it's being created down here. So it's like error relation cohorts does not exist. And then it just created the cohorts table. So I can move the cohorts table above the students table and do the same thing, and it works. So drop table, and then it created both of the tables. So you can either do the alter to alter data, the tables, or make sure that everything's in the right place, in the right order before they're created. So let's go back to actually seeding some data. So for cohort ID for Adam, so I need a cohort underscore ID. He is a part of Popple Platoon. So that will be the second ID. So ID of 2. Cohort ID. And David's a part-time Charlie. Part-time Charlie is being created the first. This is going to be the first cohort, so it's going to have an ID of 1. And Emma was a part of Mike Platoon, and she's going to be part of Mike Platoon, which has an ID of 3, which will have an ID of 3. So I can see that data now. like so. Uh-oh, what did it say? Student does not exist. Uh-oh, so right here, student does not exist. Let's see what happens. So I inserted the cohorts in there, but I had an error with the students because I spelled it wrong. Now, if I go in here again and seed it, it added all 6 of it here. So I might actually have duplicates of these part-time Charlie and Papa Platoon. Let's see if that I do. Whoop. PSQL code platoon. So since I'm actually inside of my Postgres database, I can write raw SQL in here. So I can do SQL queries.
Select star from cohorts.
And I don't forget that semicolon. So I'm selecting everything from the cohorts. I know I'm just, from the cohorts. And I just want to see what comes in here. Great. So I've got part-time Charlie, Papa Platoon, Mike Platoon, and now I've got part-time Charlie, Papa Platoon, Mike Platoon. So crap, I've got duplicate data in here, which I don't want. So I can do a couple of things. I can literally drop all my table, my schema, and reload it, which I'm going to go ahead and do, just see what happens. So I'm going to do PSQL code platoon. I'm going to reload that schema. Drop the table. Great. Now I'm going to reload that data. Great. Now I can go back into the clear PSQL code platoon. Now I can select star from cohorts. And there I've only got those 3 in there. I can also do the same thing for students. So select star from students table. And I've got the 3 students in there. So now I can say like, all right, what students are, I want to grab all the students, or so I can say like, all right, grab the cohort where it equals Mike Platoon. So I can do select. I just want to grab the cohort name from cohorts where cohort name equals Papa Platoon. Let's see if this works. Uh-oh, column Papa Platoon does not exist. And it's like select, and it gives me like a little arrow pointing right here. Does anybody know what's wrong?
Are you not allowed to use double quotes?
Correct. So when querying, you can only use single quotes. So there we go. I've got Papa Platoon right there. And if I wanted to use select star, I can also grab the ID. All right. So when querying, it's all about what table you start at, and you can bring in other tables. But before I jump into join tables, I probably won't do that tonight. We'll do that tomorrow. But quick, if I wanted to grab all the students, let's go ahead and grab like another. Let's quit. So if I wanted to grab all the students that belong to Mike Platoon, so I'm going to start at the cohorts and grab the cohorts table. And then I'm going to also bring in the students table. And I'm going to say, hey, I want all the students where the cohort name, I'm sorry, the students, yeah, the cohort ID equals the students dot cohort ID. So let's see if I can remember how to do this. So select everything from cohorts, join students on, does anyone remember this? Let me, so join two tables Postgres. Join table. Select where. So select from weather, join cities on where the weather.city equals the city name, where ID equals 2. So here I'm joining cohorts and the students table on the cohorts dot ID equals, is it double equals, single equals students dot cohort ID, where cohorts dot cohort name equals Mike Platoon. And this should bring all the students that belong to Mike Platoon. So I've got Emma and Tom. So that's a pretty long join table. You'll get a lot more practice doing this, but I just want to quickly show you that. All right. And to get out of that, quit, clear. Another thing, if I wanted to, if you ever try to drop your tables and it won't let you. So if you do drop table if exists, if data is already stored in your database and I'm trying to drop, so like if I try to, let's see if I can drop this. Oh, that still didn't work. Disregard. But if you ever run into issues with dropping your table, always just add this cascade thing to it. What this does is if I delete like the students table, it'll say anything that or if I should have done it. Let's go back. So create a table. So if I try to drop the table again, so run the schema, it still worked. Anyway, always just add drop table if exists cascade to this. Oh. That'll alleviate. If you're ever to do this drop table, always just add cascade to it. All right. I'm going to